Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
We're almost 1 week in to the era of Mark Carney.
It is my honor to respond to the Governor-General's request that I form a government. And it's a solemn duty to serve as Prime Minister at this time of great consequence for our country.
Carney, the former central banker, officially became Prime Minister late last week, and his first several days in office have been a whirlwind. There has been action to reverse a major policy from his predecessor. He's picked out a slimmer cabinet. He took off on his first international trip. He's been dogged by questions about conflicts of interest. He's had to deal with the Trump threat, planning a first minister's meeting, considering a snap election, and he's been trying to keep his political opponents at bay. Once again, it's been less than 1 week. The agenda so far has been jam-packed, but how is Carney faring as a newly minted Prime Minister? I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and today on The Big Story, I'm hoping to answer that question by speaking with Barry McLoughlin, president of TLC Transformational Leadership Consultants, a company that helps train politicians, executives, and many others in leadership and communication skills. Barry, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
It's about a week now for Mark Carney on the job as Prime Minister. Let's start off generally looking at what he's done. What has your impression been over his first number of days in office?
Actually, I think he's exceeded expectations. I'd predicted that he was going to do something internationally. I thought it'd be something to do with Trump. If Trump invited him, would he go? Turned out that didn't happen. But he decided to demonstrate, to create the perception of, I am the leader of this country. It's right away puts him in an advantageous position compared to Pierre Poilievre. So he flies across the ocean. He meets two of the major members of the G7, Macron and of course Starmer, and even brings, on his way home, drops off at Nunavut for a very major announcement. So that was a really strong perception-shaping first week. And there were bumps in the road, which we'll talk about, but at least I think he was able to hit the ground running or flying. And he was able to, I think, show himself as a leader. I was never one of the ones that thought he should instantly pull the plug and jump into an election. I felt he needed, as whatever time he could get, to demonstrate that he is the Prime Minister, put separation between him and Justin Trudeau.
So that's something he seems to have excelled at in those first days in a short time as Prime Minister so far. What about some of the challenges that he's been facing? What are the speed bumps he's had over the last few days?
Well, I think he's always shown that he really is brand new to being a politician. How to answer reporters' questions, how to communicate succinctly, inspirationally in speeches, in debates, to manage the attacks on him. He needs a lot of work in that. I remember Barack Obama saying when he first ran for president, he said, in retrospect, he said, you know what? It took me 6 months to learn how to be a national leader. 6 months on the trail. And I always have agreed with that you are just instantly doing it. You can be you can be the governor of 2 different banks around the world and still not be ever in that position. So he is learning as he goes. He's getting somewhat better, but you can see where he's not used to the personal attacks on his integrity. And this happened to him certainly over in London in the news conference. And, the chippiness, the kind of defensiveness, the, taking umbrage at the question. And this is from a reporter. I always say to people, we train how to handle news conferences. We're not even going to hear that reporter's question. They're off mic. Okay, so you're responding in a situation, and then you decide to kind of go at her. This is obviously, an awkward situation there, where he begins to challenge. You need to look deep inside yourself. He said, "Ooh, what a thing to say." Usually you say, "I disagree with the premise of your question. Here are the facts," and away you go. But he hasn't learned that. So I've had more people say to me, I don't think he's had media training. I don't think he's had debate training. I don't think he's had speech training. And of course, as people that specialize in this, I tend to notice that right away. You need training in this. And so he showed, he's got more work to do.
And just for our listeners, you're referring to a moment when Rosemary Barton of the CBC was questioning the Prime Minister about his previous private business dealings and assets and potential conflicts of interest. So aside from the reporter pushback that we've seen from him, do you think he's effectively answered or addressed those fundamental issues? Or has he allowed these gaps that essentially allow the issue to then snowball?
Well, what he obviously felt was that I am complying with the ethics commissioner's rules, policies, guidelines fully. And notice he always ends it with point final. He did that. He's done that previously in debates and so on. He doesn't want to go any further. Of course, everybody, I know enough reporters that I've had reporters say to me, listen, they ask you how much you're earning. And I've actually said, you don't expect to answer that, do you? No, I just thought I'd ask. Meaning that it doesn't hurt to ask, how much is in that? How much did you earn? How much stock options do you own? Nobody really at his stage wants to reveal the dollar amounts, and he's not going to go there. But he has to, but the problem of not quite giving us a very clear, the stepping stones he took in this, the clear path he took, he thinks that just saying that he's complying is enough. And you can see reporters aren't satisfied with that. Now, you'll never be able to totally satisfy them, but I think he has to be more clear on the timing of when the vote took place and what he was doing when Brookfield Asset Management voted to move their headquarters down to New York from Toronto. He didn't really satisfy some basic things, seemed to be contradictory. So I'm surprised that he hasn't nailed down very clear point-by-point messages to get across in those issues.
Mark Carney deciding as his first official action with his first cabinet meeting to get rid of the carbon tax, how important was that for Mark Carney in terms of electability in the next potential election?
I think very important. He had to get that monkey off his back. We never heard him making definitive statements. Now you're into the argument of the big emitters, he's going to keep it on them, and Pierre Poilievre is going to remove it. So if you love those big emitters, pumping it all into the ozone layer, great. Pierre Poilievre's your man. But if you really are concerned about that and even care at all about climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on, then Mark, Carney is saying, I'm still standing up for that. But that's a very interesting thing. Are we really is that going to decide the election? Probably not. But he knew it was a monkey on his back that he's always going to be on the defense about. And so he had to kind of clear the air, pardon the pun, but clear the air if he possibly could.
Another decision that Carney had to make right off the bat was who's going to be in his cabinet. He decided to do a much smaller cabinet that he said would be more focused and efficient. But special interest groups have been expressing a lot of concerns about this, saying that the lack of a dedicated minister for women, gender diversity, disabilities, or seniors is an issue. Did this strategy potentially backfire a little bit? Will it cause problems in an election campaign if some of these special interest groups feel they're not being represented enough?
Well, of course, he can't do one and the other. He's got to decide. Is this a lean cabinet, for the campaign, for the immediate time? He chose that path, not the ever expanding cabinet under the Trudeau years. As long as it was, gender balanced, then it was fine. He took a very different approach, and I think it showed that he is taking a different path. Also, I actually was at an event the other night. I met two of the new ministers. I swear I don't even recall their names. Like, they were nobody that you would ever have heard of. They could become somebody, but in the short 5 or 6 weeks period that they're guaranteed to be a minister, they're not going to be all that well known to Canadians. So I don't see that as the big cabinet announcement. Whoever wins this election, that first cabinet that they have to then, in effect, re-announce will be the one to really measure what his priorities are.
More on the big story with Barry McLoughlin, president of TLC Transformational Leadership Consultants, in a moment. Now, I wanted to come back to something as well that you had touched on earlier. The first trip for a new prime minister, traditionally speaking, is generally to the White House to signal, the strong bond between our two nations, the U.S. and Canada. However, probably not a big surprise to a lot of Canadians that Carney decided to take a different route and not take that trip south. Instead, he went to France and the UK, as you mentioned earlier, and those two countries also have strong links to the history of our nation. Did that strategy work here in the eyes of Canadians? What message was he really sending to voters, and was he able to achieve what he set out to by visiting France and the UK first?
Well, I guess when the invitation wasn't forthcoming, and maybe he didn't ask for it either in the back channels, if you're going down there and not walking away with anything, it's, whoops, I guess he can't do much either. So you're running a risk of going to Trump, who, by the way, won't suddenly slap us forward and go, oh, okay, never mind those tariffs. He's never going to do that. So he knows enough about him that it would be this wall pretty well that he'd be met with. And there might be a pleasantry to it, but he'd still have to step out on the White House lawn, and he would have to really stand up for Canada strongly and clearly. He could still make something out of it. But absent that invitation, showing that, and I also thought the reason why he's doing Britain and France is that these are the two major markets that we have to quickly get our stuff over to rather than just south of the border. That's really an important part of his whole economic strategy. So it works on several levels for him. And, it shows him in largely his comfort zone. I mean, he spent 7 years over there, and they do know him. He is a brand over there, and a strong brand. So he felt he was in a solid, pretty safe thing to do, but showing leadership. And I think on that level, it worked for him.
And what about the Trump card? Has he been properly saying what he needs to say about President Trump and the threats that we as a country are facing? Or is there more to be desired out of a message from a newly minted prime minister when we're facing this massive economic threat from what has long been our closest trading partner?
I think I know him well enough to say he's a small C conservative guy, meaning that he doesn't just like to shoot his mouth off. He knows the limits of where we are right now. We're just before April 2nd when we're going to get hit with massive tariffs, it looks like. There's Doug Ford saying, we want to be first in line looking for exemptions. I wouldn't have advised him to use that phrase, by the way. It sort of means we're going to be first in line begging for our... But anyway, I think with Mark Carney, he's saying just enough, stand up Canada, stand up clearly, stand up strongly, fight back, we're sovereign. He's doing all those right things. He can't do a thing really at this point other than continue to beat the drum and make sure Canada is making its case. But I think April 2nd, right in the middle of this campaign, will determine a lot on the response of Canada, response of Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney personally to the moves that Trump will make. And I think that's going to be the real determinator of that.
Okay, so the biggest test on the U.S. file is yet to come for Mark Carney, clearly. Trump also recently on Fox News was talking about the Canadian election, saying that he would prefer a liberal rather than a conservative, and then bashed conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. I will point out as well, he didn't mention either of them by name. He mentioned Trudeau, but he didn't mention Mark Carney by name, didn't mention Pierre Poilievre by name. What do you make of those comments and how that could potentially impact the view of either leader in the eyes of Canadians and the election?
Well, Canadians have reached the point where they don't believe anything that Trump says. So he can say it. I noticed in social media, half the people on there are saying that he's deliberately doing that as a backhand way to support Poilievre. They're saying, no, it's the opposite. So I don't think there's any firm outcome of that other than he's liable to say anything given the time of day that he's being asked it. We know he appears just he doesn't like Canada. He claims he does, but really he doesn't. And he sort of, if you asked him an hour later, he might tilt the other way. So I think Canadians don't hold a lot of value necessarily in each of the comments that he makes. I don't think it either helped or hurt either one of them. I think, you could make a claim for it, but I'm not sure it really tilted any vote in any direction.
When do you think Mark Carney might pull the trigger on an election? It seems like all signs are pointing to sometime this week because Parliament's set to return on March 24th. Do you think he might try to test the House, or are all signs pointing in the correct direction that we will likely be heading to the polls soon?
Well, given the fact that he's meeting the first ministers on Friday, I can't see him both doing that and walking over to Rideau Hall. I sort of now thinking Saturday. Not a lot going on. The media there. He lives around the corner. I walk over there pretty handily. I think that it'll probably be Saturday because I had thought it would be Friday, but now that he's using the full agenda of the week to get there, he'd love to walk away with a firm agreement by the first ministers on internal trade and so on. So I think that it would be Saturday. Some people say Sunday, but I'm sort of thinking Saturday.
How are the other parties handling the new prime minister? Have Pierre Poilievre as leader of the Conservatives or Jagmeet Singh as leader of the NDP been able to pivot their messaging and their campaigns in the way that they need to move away from Justin Trudeau and focus now on Mark Carney?
Well, starting with Pierre Poilievre, I do believe that he was he pretty well saw what was going on, and you could see there, just like Justin, Carney, just like Justin, carbon tax Carney, they've been hammering him for months on end. So they aren't changing much of that, you notice. I'm a bit surprised that, I watched him in L'Oreal with the laid off steel workers there, thanks to Trump's tariffs, and his slogan at the front there, right on the podium, was "Axe the tax." I'm going, okay, this is in some kind of strange disconnect with the news he needed to make on what we're going to do with laid off workers like this when these tariffs start to roll through the economy. Instead, he's still going on and on about the carbon tax. He's trying to milk that dry. I have noted for months that if this were a 2024 election, that'd be fantastic. Oh my gosh, go for it. But this is 2025. The world has changed. Canadians' feelings, anxieties, aspirations, everything are deeply stirred up. And he's made his announcement with the kind of pseudo signing in front of reporters of something that he was signing there. I knew that was coming for a year. He answered my question a year ago that we don't need the carbon tax for consumers to meet climate change. So that was, to me, a very obvious thing he was going to be doing. I'm just very surprised that the Poilievre campaign has not made the gear shift necessary. That it still sounds very much like 2024. He hooks in a couple of things into it, but goes back. So I think that they need to make a full transition. And when you want to become prime minister, it's a double-edged sword. Yes, you have to attack especially the one now that's leading the polls, Mark Carney. You must attack him. You must undermine him. He's got very soft support. Only half of Mark Carney's voters are strongly supportive. The other half could change. Whereas Poilievre's vote, 2 out of 3 of his voters are strongly going to vote for him regardless. So he's always had that extremely strong base, but he has to grow the base. And to me, the other side of that sword is let's see Pierre Poilievre as prime minister. Let's see what he would be like. Is he going to be prime minister for all of us, or is he still going to attack? And I think the divide versus unify thematic is very important here. He is a very, very effective attacker. He in the House, nobody could touch him. He's got quips and lines that can cut down but I think given Trump's personality, people really don't like that over time, especially the soft kind of voter that cares about the human dimension of the leaders. What kind of a person is he? Would he be as prime minister? So they've tried it with their commercials, him and Anna and their child, and those are wonderful commercials. But in terms of his earned media, what he does on a daily basis, we're not seeing any sign of that side of Pierre Poilievre. I know him well enough to say, actually, he has that side to him, but he sure is keeping it under wraps for whatever reason. And so when you see that going on, and then, let's take for a moment Jagmeet Singh. Well, he's just trying to get some oxygen. I mean, they haven't been this low since the year 2000. I mean, they're way underwater. They're now in the single digits. They've got to somehow work their way back up to their traditional 20 percentile kind of vote, which would have an impact on Carney's campaign. But I'm not seeing enough distinguishing factors in there. The Liberals, we always knew, would take ownership of the pharmacare, ownership of the $10 a day, childcare. We know that when you go in, lock in with them in the deal, they're going to get the credit and you're not. And that's exactly what's happened here. So trying to find a space in there is really not easy to do.
Just curious as well, your thoughts. The Conservatives have come out this week with a strategy for the election campaign that we haven't really seen from a major political party, and that is to fly and bus around the country without any media contingent in tow. And for our listeners, usually what happens is reporters pay their way, so there's no added cost to the campaigns themselves, but we pay money to jump on a plane and follow the leaders around the country as they make these announcements. And the Conservatives had said in the name of cost cutting, they are not going to have any media members on their tour as a part of an election campaign, which is kind of surprising. What is your take on that, and whether that will be good for the Conservatives or bad for the Conservatives throughout an election campaign?
It's not going to be good for them. In fact, it sends the wrong signal. You'll do what, people worried. You're going to do what Trump did, remove real journalists and bring in, podcasters, influencers into the Oval Office, into the news conferences to replace journalists that have to account to somebody for the accuracy of what they're saying. So that's a worry on that level. Secondly, I've never understood this. Pierre Poilievre has terrific skills in dealing with media. There are very, very few questions he's ever been asked that he fumbles, doesn't know what to say about, gets caught out on. He is very, very skilled at it. And why they're so protective of him, I have no idea. Those are easy hits every single day. You step off the plane, you make several comments, and you move on. Even go to the back of the plane and do the same thing. So there are many avenues, not to hold big formal news conferences and everything else, but a little more flexible, informal style, which we do need to see more of him. So I'm very surprised they're doing it. Other than the Conservatives have always felt, and Stephen Harper, I think, would demonstrate this, really never felt they got a fair shake from the media. But, people don't, you don't want to come across as a whiner or somebody that doesn't want to face accountability. I think that it really doesn't really benefit them, frankly. Does it totally surprise me they're doing this? Not really. But I think it's, I don't think they needed to do this. Let's put it that way.
All right. Barry, we'll end it there. Thank you so much for your thoughts on Mark Carney, the election, Trump, all of this. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Cormac.
That was Barry McLoughlin, president of TLC Transformational Leadership Consultants. I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and that was The Big Story. You can send us your feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can also find us on the Seeker app or on all your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. Thanks for listening.